I am Lowo Adeyemi, your number one healthcare architect, and this is Designed for Recovery, a global platform where we explore how space, design, and built environment influence healing far beyond medicine. Today's episode is an important one because it addresses a group that healthcare design often overlook, not intentionally, but systematically. When we talk about accessibility in healthcare, we often think about ramps, handrails, wider doorways. But what about cognitive accessibility? What about patients who struggle not physically, but mentally with how information, space, signage, and instruction are presented? Today, we are talking about dyslexia and more broadly, neurodivergent minds and how healthcare spaces can either increase stress or actively support recovery. I'm joined by Russell Van Brooklyn, New York State Senate funded dyslexia researcher whose work focuses on how environment interacts with cognitive processing, stress, and comprehension. You're welcome to Design for Recovery, Russell Van Brooklyn.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Russell, good to see you today. And I believe it's quite freezing where you are today.
Yes, I'm in upstate New York, right outside of our state capital of Albany, about 150 miles north of New York City.
Wow.
So yes, I would love to send you the frozen tundra that I'm in to Nigeria. I'm sure you'd like to change.
Wow. Well, good to see you anyway. It's good to see you. So let's go straight down to the show, Russell. And to start off with, I would like you to take a few moments to explain why you do what you do, a brief origin story.
Well, it happened when I went to the New York State Assembly internship program in the late 90s. I was finishing up college and I had a first grade reading and writing level. So they essentially gave me massive accommodations, just off the charts accommodations to get me through the program. They sent my report back with a recommendation of 15 credits, an A- to the State University of New York Center at Buffalo and their political science department, who looked at the accommodations the state gave me and they hated it, so they flunked me instead. Instead of A- for 15 credits, I got 15 credits back. So yeah, that was fun. So I decided to dedicate my life to solving dyslexia for dyslexics, for reading and writing. I went to law school to learn to read and write. It took me a couple of years. Then I went back to the New York State Senate. And I said, I want you to fund my dyslexia research program, which they don't do. So after years with the New York State Education Department, senior professors in Buffalo, and the State Research Foundation, we finally got funded for a multi-year study at the Averill Park Central School District, right outside the state capital of Albany, New York. Okay. We took the most brilliant juniors and seniors, say 16 to 18-year-old dyslexics, highly motivated, highly intelligent. They were reading and writing at the 12 to 13-year-old level. And one class period a day for the school year, we increased their writing to the average range of entering graduate students, think 21 and 22. They all went on to college. They all graduated. Grade point averages of 2.5 to 3.6 and cost New York State taxpayers under $900 a student. Compared to the best dyslexic college at the time, we were 2 to 3 times more effective for less than 1% of the cost. And that's how I got started.
That's awesome. So let me ask, like, how many are they in the group that you're working with? Like, how many people are involved in the group you're working with?
Well, we're just moving over from working with individual families and students, which on any given day, just with this, I'd work with about 3 to 5, which is about the limit I can really focus on. And we're moving over to putting a learning platform up on school.com. And we're about ready to launch our first book. So we're looking at getting up to probably 1,000 to 2,000 families at any given time going through our system.
Okay. So before you leave the show today, we'll have your link and how people can contact you, listeners who are listening to the show. All right. To begin with, many people still think dyslexia simply a reading difficulty. From research perspective, how would you describe dyslexia, especially in terms of how a patient experiences the world?
Okay. Well, it's really simple. We can just go right to the science. This is the top book in my field.
Wow.
It's called Overcoming Dyslexia by Sally Shaywitz from Yale. She's a medical doctor. All right. And this is the second edition. I'm just going to turn over to page 78, figure 23. That's dyslexia. Now, do you see how the back part of your brain has this massive neural activity?
Yes.
Now, do you see how the back part of mine has essentially next to zero?
Yes.
Now, do you see how the front part of my brain's approximately 2.5 times overactive?
Wow. So that's
Okay.
just
Yeah. Well, so essentially, my brain is completely different than yours. Completely. So how that manifests itself in the real world is in our educational system, kindergarten through college, which is essentially more of the back part of the brain, is dyslexics have a huge disadvantage. We walk into grad school and day one or soon thereafter, we just dominate it. And that has to deal with a few simple reasons, which then I'll show you how we can apply to the healthcare setting. The first thing is dyslexics are academic specialists, not generalists. We excel in our narrow little area. In that area, we've been focusing on that ever since we were like 5 years old. We know what we like. We know what we're good at, like at an absurdly young age. So we build that up, and then we got 2.5 times the neural activity here. The problem is, if you ask a dyslexic, in their speciality, do you have ideas flying around your head at light speed? Key question, but with little to no organization, they're going to say yes. So what we need to do is to help focus the dyslexic brain to organize itself by using writing as a measurable output. So essentially what I did with my original program is we gave them an outline of what they needed to fill in for a 5-paragraph essay, and we just brought them through graduate records exam, argument after argument, until they literally mastered everything. All right. And then the learning curve was extraordinary. So what effect does this have when you're trying to design medical spaces? What I'm about to tell you will also really help designing things for gen ed people as well, because what we found is what works for dyslexics to optimize learning also works really well for gen ed students.
I believe we'll come to that very soon now. Oh, all right. I want to ask you a question from the explanation just now. So, a person who is dyslexic, is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, dyslexic.
That person, are you saying they can't do much outside of their micro focus area?
I'm not saying that they can't. What I'm saying is, with the right remediation, we can get the students to, once we get them to, when they're way below grade level, we are absolutely next to just can't function outside of our speciality. Once we get them to their grade level, they can function just fine. Just like in the original program I told you about, these kids, we brought them to essentially the writing skills of a college graduate. Then they went to college, and they all graduated with GPAs of 2.5 to 3.6. Not bad for a $900 intervention period cost. So we have to get them to grade level. Now, once they are at grade level, what's going to happen is they will get through wherever we send them. Again, they had grades between 2.5 to 3.6. But once they go to grad school, we own the place day one or soon thereafter. We completely dominate it because it's in our very narrowly focused little area.
All right. So that distinction is quite crucial, because healthcare environments also are already cognitively demanding spaces rather. Patients are often anxious, in pain, unfamiliar with terminologies, under time pressure. For someone with dyslexia, that cognitive load can become overwhelming. So from your research now, what happened when a dyslexic patient enter a healthcare space that wasn't designed with cognitive differences in mind? You know, you're about to say something about that.
Just like everybody else, but amplified to the magnitude of multiple times. So if the space is not designed well, if they don't understand what's going on, the front part of our brain triggers. Now remember, I got 2.5 times the neural activity that you do.
Yes, you said.
And where your brain, especially after you're educated, is much more organized, mine by definition is completely unorganized. It's flying around at light speed with little to no organization. So there is a way to fix this that not only works for dyslexics, but works for gen ed people as well. So how we need to redesign things is what I'm going to first ask you is going to sound completely off base. but it's the best way I found to explain things. I
Okay.
use universal themes to make things functional in this area. So the best way I found to describe universal themes is through a movie review.
All right.
So I want you to think about a movie that you think is one of the best of all times, that
Okay.
you know extremely well, that everybody's seen.
Okay.
What's that movie?
The Godfather.
The Godfather. Okay. Yes. Now, The Godfather. Now I'm going to ask you a tough question. I need you to summarize The Godfather into a one-word universal theme that reflects it as best you can imagine. What's that one-word universal theme?
That'll be, can I say tragic?
Tragic. Yep, fantastic. So, if you look at a standard movie review of The Godfather at the time, probably written by somebody from the Ivy League, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, whatever, they would probably tell you exactly what happened. This happened, then this happened, and it showed up in the New York Times.
Yeah.
A 6-year-old could have written that review. Here's how you do it more properly. You would take your universal theme of tragic and ask, how do the actors individually do with this? The main ones, the ones that you care about. How did the director do? How did the screenwriter do? And then you write your review that way. Then a person can read your review, say, I get what you're saying. Now, based on that, do I want to see this movie? But you have not ruined it for them, okay? But the problem with tragic is it's a broad universal theme, and you can do things broadly, but you can't get it laser focused. Okay?
Yeah.
See the leap? See the epiphany you just had?
Yes.
So now what we need to do is to take a process that I fundamentally use to teach dyslexics how to read, and we're going to apply it to the medical space.
Okay.
So when you go into a medical space, you have certain sections, certain areas.
Okay.
And they're specifically for certain things, but the signage and the reason you're there pretty much, pardon my French, stinks, okay? Here's how we can make it much better. So what you really want to do is take the underlying people, your consumer, the person that's going to come into the space, not all the professionals that work there day to day. Because if they don't know what's going on in this space day to day, well, they probably aren't going to be, they shouldn't be there. All right. Yeah. So the consumers, then you're going to want to create what I like to call an avatar or pick somebody that represents, even better, a typical consumer for this space that people trust. All right. So, and it's going to be different. If you're in Nigeria, I would pick who's the most likely person to come into the space, which will be different if I set this up in the suburban upstate New York. Okay. So you want to get somebody that represents the community. Then what you're going to want to know is here's the simple process. We have a hero. Hero wants to do something. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to find out what they specifically want to do and then find a word that best represents what's inside their head. And we're going to use that for the main signage and then for maybe a sentence below it that explains what's going on. So you're going to take your avatar person. Okay. Their name is going to be the hero. Yeah. So I'm just going to call her Jill. Okay. Just some random name. So Jill, what do you think is going on here? What do you need to understand that's going on here? Okay. She's saying, I'm going to come to this area for blood work. Okay.
Okay.
And then kind of have her describe what she thinks this is for. Make sure she understands what this is for and have her repeat it until she knows exactly what it's for. I'm coming to this area for whatever, and this is what it is. What you're then going to do is for each sentence, you're going to pull out the most important word, okay? And then you're going to have like three or five of them, or six, or whatever the number is. You're then going to pick the best, most important word that represents what this area is, okay? That's our base universal thing. That's like the word that you use to write your review for The Godfather. It's still too broad, but you got a good, accurate word. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the thesaurus, and we're going to take that word, and we're going to have Jill look at probably about 10 synonyms, okay? And if that's not good enough, do the entire level. You're going to have her type out the base universal theme, the best, most important word. I'm going to now call that the universal theme. She's going to have her type that out. You're going to go to ChatGPT and say, give me a customized definition of this. All right. And you'll have that. Then say, give me like 10 synonyms of this word, something that's a bit more focused. Okay. say, give me 10 with custom definitions, or give me 50 with custom definitions. Find the one that best fits inside Jill's head. Okay. That word is now your post-universal thing, or not, that is what you're going to call this area. Okay. Because it's much more focused. It's best represents what's in your avatar's head. And then based on that very specific thing, ask Jill to explain what's going on here until it's accurate. Okay. Then you're going to put that under the word. So now what you have is you have an extremely focused word that allows her to explain, unlike what you said with tragedy, you couldn't get that specific. Now that we got something much more specific, she can now explain to me in her words what this means. You go back and forth with the professional until it's accurate. And now you have a word that describes what this area is, that best represents your avatar's, what she's looking at, and a description. Now, is this going to be perfect for everybody? No. But it's going to be a heck of a lot easier because you're dealing with a member that really represents the community.
Wow.
And it'll be much easier for them to know what's going on here and why, and they're going to settle down. And especially for the neurodiverse, they're going to be like, oh, that's what it is. And now their brain isn't going to be shooting off in 5,000 directions.
Russell, because of our time, what you just explained is more universal design, and also in designing healthcare spaces, there's what we call evidence-based procedure. And in this procedure, there's a multidisciplinary setup. Some people call it charrette. And where you put the end users, the users, the physicians, all the stakeholders together, then the designer to be part of the design team from the beginning of the design process. So what you're saying now, that kind of people, you bring them in and you create a kind of baseline network before the design process even started, so that all this idea comes in from the design phase process before the construction. Then you have something good for everybody, not only the dyslexic patient, like you said.
Yes, but even if you already constructed it, then you can use this process to rename it so that people know what's going on. The big problem you have in medical hospitals is there is no other position anywhere on the planet that is as complicated as medicine. I'm just going to give you the United States, for example. You have 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, probably 7 years of residency for the most complicated surgeries, followed by a couple of years of fellowship. I mean, these doctors are 35, 38 before they're done. Yeah. They're training.
Is there in Nigeria? Okay. Same thing in Nigeria too.
Yes. And there is so much, they're used to so much complication, and people don't know what it is. I mean, half the time I'm taking my phone, I'm photographing something and asking ChatGPT to explain me what does this mean. If you follow this process, then the people that are using the space all the time now know exactly what it is and what they're meant to be there. That lowers the anxiety considerably, and you can change signage even after you build it.
All right. I would like you to explain broadly on signage, wayfinding, and cognitive load, as it were. But right now, will it be fair to say that poorly designed environment can unintentionally worsen patient outcome for dyslexic individuals?
Yes, it clearly comes down to go in any medical space. You don't know what's going on because the verbiage, the words are too complicated. For most people, that provides some sort of anxiety because the dyslexic front part of the brain is 2.5 times overactive, and they have minimum ability to organize it. It flies off at 2.5 times the speed with no organization, and it makes the anxiety much worse.
So that means that kind of condition can increase their stress level and give them a very bad outcome, as it were.
Well, yes. I mean, we're used to this sort of thing. We've been dealing with it since we were young children. But if there's something you can do to reduce the anxiety because we know what's going on and what's expected here, that would help out tremendously. And it's just something I've talked to many doctors about, and they would say, yeah, that would make sense, but we have to get through all the bureaucratic, minefields, and it just never changes.
So this is where design become a form of care, because, when a patient is struggling to read a sign, understand a form, or follow wayfinding, it is not just convenience. I know you agree with me. It can affect appointment adherence, and maybe medication accuracy also, and even trust in the healthcare system. So I told you the other time that I will want you to discuss broadly on wayfinding, language, and cognitive load. So let's talk about wayfinding because it's a recurring theme in healthcare design. And from a dyslexic research standpoint, what are the most common wayfinding challenges a dyslexic patient face in hospitals and clinics? If you can explain that, I will share.
Well, sure. The most common problem we have is we have these dense words and they're everywhere. We're giving instructions with these words designed to look like for PhDs. The explanations are completely not clear. The simple solution that I have to tell everybody who's dyslexic is put ChatGPT app on your phone, take a picture of it, and have it explain to you in English what this means. Why should we have to go and do that for everything? We're confused. The problem that we have is one of the biggest issues is when you leave and you're given these insanely dense instructions that I even know lawyers who have trouble reading this and asking, well, yeah, what does this mean for me? And then they're trying to talk to the person sending them out and they have a line of people and it just causes all these problems. So if you follow this process, you can take this complicated medical language, reduce it to a universal theme, find an avatar patient that best represents your community and write things out in simple language. I mean, heck, lawyers started learning this 30 years ago. Writing things in simpler language, not in all this Latin humbo jumbo, okay? And because otherwise what happens is normal people will then go and try to ask, what should I do as we're leaving here? The dyslexics take even more time and the line keeps backing up. It's a system that's good for no one.
So Russell, one thing we emphasize on this show and podcast is reducing cognitive effort wherever possible. If you could speak directly to architects, healthcare designers that are listening right now, what design principles would you say are essential for dyslexia inclusive wayfinding?
Well, what you need to understand about dyslexics, and I'm just going to give you a brief model, is we're best when we work inside a speciality. If we're in medicine, that really means even if this isn't what we're really good at, if we understand what you're trying to communicate through that universal theme process that I gave you, because what's happening is in the front part of our brain where we have to have things happen, we have ideas flying around at light speed, but with little to no organization. If when you're given things in writing that are made from that avatar process that I gave you, we can then lock in on it and it's organized and we can follow that, which helps our brain stop being so chaotic. The other thing, what Yale's research clearly shows is the front part of the brain deals with two areas, word analysis followed by articulation. So what I did is I showed you this. I said, okay, let's come up with a word that best represents this area, which best represents an avatar for that community. And then we explained it. Okay, we added on. That's exactly what this part of the brain specializes in. So if you follow that general process, you're going to make this much easier for the neurodiverse community. Hospitals are not trying to make things hard for the neurodiverse. They set things up for their typical patient, which is not neurodiverse, because that's 80+% of their patients. They designed it for the back part of the brain, but they've also designed it for an educational level that's far beyond and specialized compared to the average, even gen ed student, normal brain person. Okay. So the process that I gave you for the neurodiverse, that would make it so much easier for the typical brain person. And that we've shown that time and time again. Most of the innovations in education comes in special education, then spread it out to everybody else.
Do you know one good thing about your explanation is that none of them are extreme or costly, and they are not about special design.
It's it's very inexpensive. You just have to figure out who is the best representative of your typical patient going through this and use them as an avatar. If you want to, you could maybe do 2 or 3 different people and kind of blend them together. But normally I find one is sufficient. And again, it's not going to be best for everybody, but it'll be far better than what's currently there. Okay. The whole point of this is to be inexpensive. How expensive is signage?
It's not. It's not expensive at all.
Exactly. How expensive is everything in that area? Extraordinary. Here's the thing about medical staff. I don't care where you
Yeah.
are or what you're working with. It's a stressful environment. And when people
It
get
is.
stressed, they tend to implode. And I have literally seen in the emergency room people acting so horribly to ER attending doctors. I could have sworn they're going to call the police and get them arrested. Because any other place in the United States, that's what would have happened. They're like, that's nothing. Okay. If you could do some things to
Yeah.
systematically reduce the stress level and to get less of that angry, violent confrontation. I'm not talking violence as in physical violence, but the threat of it could help out tremendously.
Yeah.
I can't imagine a person who spent 13 years training to become a physician, then have to be told 3 times a day or 10 times a day they're going to get their teeth kicked in. I just can't imagine that. So we can help reduce that.
I agree with you. And Russell, let's try and take a shift away from the narrative. And there's another aspect of healthcare that rarely gets discussed openly, and that is shame. Many dyslexic adults have spent years masking difficulties, especially in formal environment like hospitals. So from your research, how does shame or fear of exposure affect patient behavior?
Well, to be honest with you, once you get into the adult world and you just get used to it, it drops a lot. But when you're in a child, your growing up years, especially when you're in a strong academic household.
Yes.
And let me be very clear. I've had a lot of experience with people from Nigeria, and I would have to say in virtually every instance, they are extraordinarily academically accomplished. Doctors, lawyers, accountants, school is incredibly important. And with dyslexia, it causes a very hard time to get through until you get into a graduate program. And the shame can be extraordinary. And what it has done to some dyslexics is to push them where they shame themselves extraordinarily to compel their academic performance. They just focus on everything, on just giving up their friends, giving up a social life, and just doing everything conceivably humanly possible through just saying, if I don't do well on this test, my family will disown me. My family will hate me. It puts extraordinary pressure on them. And honestly, after years, by the time we get into high school, it's like we're just used to it.
So you're talking about the pressure of expectation now. What you've been expected to do, what's expected of you from your family and people around you.
Yes. And
That's
to,
right.
to give you an example from a medical sense, there was one student that I didn't tutor him because he didn't need it, but he worked so hard. He literally had no social life going through high school and college. Then he went into medical school and he had a really hard time for the first 2 years. He got through it. But when he went into the field and they asked him all these questions, how do you do well with this? How do you do this? He could just remember everything and apply it so instantaneously he excelled. Ended up going into being an ER doctor.
Wow, that's great. So that's deeply important anyway. And because healthcare spaces should never make any patient feel inadequate, especially when they are already vulnerable, And my question now is, how can design help reduce the sense of the pressure we're talking about and exposure? How can architecture design, healthcare design, how can it help reducing the pressure?
Well, the main thing is what I already discussed. Just knowing what this space is in and what you expect to happen in that space.
Okay.
And if you want to continue that with the paperwork, a big thing is for medical, which they still have not done, is do what lawyers have started learning decades ago in the United States. Try using proper language that your normal patients can actually understand. And let's just take Nigeria, for example. You have a phenomenally educated population.
Yes.
But even when you're educated, we don't know all these specific things and the terminology in the medical field. So if you can follow that process that I gave you and applied it across more of the board and to explain things in writing that actual people can understand, it will help reduce the stress level considerably.
That's right. That's right. All right, let's move on. At one thing I want to underline here is that at Design for Recovery, we talk about recovery as more than symptoms management. It's about dignity, autonomy, and psychological safety. So, from your perspective now, what does neurodiversity affirming healthcare space look like and feels like? How does it look like neurodiversity affirming healthcare space?
Okay. So the best example I would say is the instructions you have when you're leaving the medical place. So when you're looking at that, what to follow, how to keep going, and just to communicate it. So especially for a dyslexic, the thing that we absolutely hate is feeling stupid. Because I've talked to people with PhDs, lawyers, doctors. They would say, even in elementary school, they felt stupid. We hate that. We absolutely detest that. You want to send us going downhill, that's how you do it. So when you get these medical instructions, I look at any of these things and I'm like, I don't understand any of this. You start asking the doctor questions and they're already 5 minutes late for the next thing they're doing, no matter what it is. Even on a slow day, they're behind. And you try asking questions, you can't understand this crazy document. They're trying to explain, we don't get it. And it just causes a lot more stress all around. Literally, I tell everybody, just take your phone, photograph it with ChatGPT, and have them explain it to you. But then you're relying on some artificial intelligence thing that could be wrong. So the simplest thing, again, is to go through that process. You have a hero, the patient. They want to do something. Explain what that is in a paragraph or two. Come up with the best, most important word for each sentence, find the best one overall, and then from there, go into the thesaurus and find something that's best in your avatar's head, something much more specific. Use that definition then to explain what's going on. If you do that, for example, you broke your collarbone. Okay, what's the words to describe that based on the process I gave you? Now, what's the plain language instructions you can give based on that? I literally have taught some healthcare providers to create that avatar, create something customized within ChatGPT so that they can then just create instructions that actually make sense and to use that. Okay. And then you give that to them. They go, oh, now I get it. Or they may have a question or two, but they're not going all crazy because you do not want the recovery of your patients to be related to ChatGPT on their phone. You just don't want that. Because give you a little hint, these things hallucinate sometimes.
I agree with you 100%. So moving so fast to the final segment, Russell, we have done all this discussion and explanation, and I must confess to you 100%, if some of these things are put into place, they will not only give them a quality health care, as it were, but it will help the total outcome of a dyslexic patient. So many healthcare facilities still treat the issue of accessibility as a compliance checklist. But cognitive accessibility is not always required by code. If you agree with me, yet it is.
Well, it is the United States because of the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 5.
So, but before you answer, I want to drop this question with you. So you give me a broader view. What are the mindset shifts that you believe the healthcare leaders or stakeholders need to make?
Well, the thing is, if you're dealing with a physical disability, you just know. Somebody's in a wheelchair, they're using a cane. You can just understand what modifications need to be made. And quite frankly, if somebody's going through some difficulty, to ask, would you like my help or not? They may say yes, they may say no. Yeah. When you're dealing with dyslexia, the shift that you need to make, again, let's look at the science. My brain is exactly opposite of yours. You have no reference about what to do with it, no general understanding. Okay, so when you're looking at the neurodiverse, I would just follow that process that I gave you earlier and apply it to a broad range of things, understanding that you're not putting in all of this effort just to accommodate 1/10 to 1/5 of your population. If you follow that properly, you will make it much easier to apply this to your general population as well, and to make that much easier. That's one thing we found with dyslexia research over the decades. But to make that shift is something very difficult because you have no reference to what it means. And to be honest with you, most so-called dyslexic experts don't really understand it. Their focus is, how can we kick up activity in the back part of the brain? Well, your doctors and designers have no interest in that. But to understand the difference between this not working and this is working, I explain that to you in a matter of minutes. If you were to focus on that and the general process I gave you, it can really help, not only to help the dyslexic, but everyone. That's the mind shift that you need to make that's different.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. So that shift from compliance to compassion is exactly what this podcast stands for. And because healing does not begin with treatment, it begins the moment a patient enters a space and feel either overwhelmed or supported. And I believe we've covered all these areas in our discussion today. So as we close, I want to leave our listener, designers, clinicians, policymakers with these thoughts. If a space requires extra effort to understand, it is already demanding energy from someone who may have very little to spare. Designing for dyslexic mind is not about lowering standards. It's about raising our awareness of how deeply space affects cognition, stress, and recovery. So, Russell, I want to thank you for bringing both science and humanity into this conversation. Do you have any closing remark?
So the main issue that I want you to remember is focus on word analysis followed by articulation based on the process that I explained to you. That's the part that, according to Yale's research, really does work with a 2.5 times overactive front part of the dyslexic brain. If you have any questions on how I might be able to help you implement this, just visit me at dyslexiaclasses.com. That's with an S, dyslexiaclasses.com, and just hit the contact button there and set up a time, and I'll be happy to walk you through this.
All right, Russell, like I said earlier at the beginning of the conversation, that you have to drop your contact at the show notes. We'll drop it at the show notes so that listeners can, if they need to, contact you, and probably your social media contacts and some other ones that will help them in contacting you. All right. I want to say a very big thank you to everyone who has listened today. And if this episode resonated with you, I want you to share with someone shaping healthcare environment. Because when we design beyond neurotypical, we don't just create accessible space, we create healing ourselves. And until next time, when we meet again, remember, good design does not ask patients to adapt, it adapts to them. Thank you for listening. My name is Lowell Adeyemi, and this is Design for Recovery. Goodbye. That is the end of the interview segment with Russell Van Brocklin, and I believe you have learned so much from that conversation. So this time, I welcome you to another segment. On Design for Recovery, we often talk about how healthcare environments shape healing, sometimes in a way we notice and often in a way we don't. But every so often, it is important to pause the theory and look at real spaces, real corridors, real waiting room, real care environment that people move through every day, often at their most vulnerable. That is why we are introducing a new recurring segment on this show, the Design for Recovery Evidence-Based Healthcare Facility Review. In this segment, we take a careful evidence look at healthcare facilities, not to praise or criticize for the sake of it, but to understand how design is either supporting recovery or quietly working against it. Now, it is important to be very clear about how these reviews are done. At Design for Recovery, we assess design, not clinical care. We do not evaluate medical outcomes, staff competence, or quality of treatment. What we examine is the physical environment and how it impacts safety, stress, dignity, staff well-being, and overall recovery experience. This review follows a structured professional framework in evidence-based design research, including principles from Center for Health Design, Roger Ulrich Theory of Supportive Design, Facility Guideline Institute Standards,
well-building standards, that is healthcare adaptations, and global health guidance on inclusive and healthy care environment. In simple terms, we are asking questions like, does this space reduce stress or add to it? Does the layout support safety, dignity? Can people navigate this facility without fear or confusion? Does the environment care for the caregiver as well as the patient? Each facility we discuss is reviewed through consistent lenses like safety and risk reduction, emotional and psychological well-being, wayfinding and autonomy, equity and accessibility, staff support, and environmental comfort and resilience. This is not about aesthetics, it is about human impact. And because integrity matters here, these reviews are conducted independently. Facilities are not reviewed by request or payment, and recognition, when given, cannot be purchased. Our responsibility is first to patients, caregivers, and communities. During this segment, you will hear three things clearly: what works, what does not, and most importantly, why it matters. The goal is not to shame buildings. The goal is to raise standard of care environments by making design visible, understandable, and accountable. So as you've been moving into healthcare facility review in a subsequent episode, listen not just for what you see, but for what the space is asking people to carry emotionally, cognitively, and physically. Because in healthcare, buildings are never neutral. They either support healing or they quietly make it harder. So, starting from the next episode, we will be reviewing facilities, spaces, how they should be. What are the evidences supporting how this space should be designed? Therefore, I want you to watch out for this segment in our subsequent episode. Thank you for listening. I am Lowell Adeyemi, and this is Design for Recovery.